Welcome to On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 71. That's right, we're back at the Apex in Vegas. You know, there is actually a lot to love about the Apex in Vegas. You know, it is a little bit quieter, so obviously you lose a little bit of that atmosphere, but I also love to hear the shots land hard. I also love to hear the corner team as well. I also love that little aspect of can a fighter hear the commentary. And yeah, it's not brilliant, but from time to time, I don't mind it at all. And this is actually quite a fun fight card as well. There's a couple of fights that don't really interest me too much, if I'm being honest. But for the most part, there's a lot of fun fights. I think there's some high-level fights as well, especially in that main event in the heavyweight division between Sergei Pavlovich and Curtis Razor Blaydes. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, there's going to be a Blaydes AI recap on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/MMA Play 365. That'll be in its own Blaydes AI playlist. So if you are interested in the UFC prediction software, the algorithms, and the predictions that were pulled out from last week's event at UFC Kansas City, then definitely check out that recap as well. And also, if you are struggling to know how to use Blaydes AI and to make it work to your advantage and from a betting perspective as well, a lot of the stuff that I talk about in that recap is covered from that betting perspective, and you'll be able to get a good idea of how to use Blaydes AI to make money. But now we're going to fire straight into the breakdowns, and we start with that main event at the top of the UFC heavyweight division. And this could be a fight that has serious implications on a UFC heavyweight championship fight. I do think that Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic will run it at some point. I know there's a little bit of back and forth at the minute, but I've got a funny feeling that that fight will go ahead and it'll be the winner of this fight that takes the winner of Jones versus Stipe, which should, in all seriousness, be Jon Jones. But I think either of these fighters actually give Jon Jones a real difficult fight, both for different reasons, and that's because there's a stylistic clash. And within this breakdown, there's a bit of irony. There's also some betting advice if you are betting one side of this fight as well, which I'll run through. Now, the irony is, at the end of last year, at the end of 2022, myself, Sean, our DFS expert at MMA Play 365, and also Mrs. MMA Casual as well, Hannah, we all got together and we predicted who was going to be the champion in each weight category by the end of this year. And Sergei Pavlovich was actually my prediction for who's going to be the heavyweight champion by the end of this year. At this point, I didn't know Jon Jones was coming back, to be fair, but Sergei Pavlovich was in there. So you would assume that because I'm thinking Sergei Pavlovich is going to be the heavyweight champion by the end of this year, that I would be picking him in this fight, and that's not the case. And listen, styles make fights, and it's all about the route to the championship. You know, if Sergei Pavlovich could have bypassed Blaydes and gone through somebody else, then that might have been his route to the UFC heavyweight championship title, or at least title fight. But with Curtis Blaydes in his way, I think Curtis Blaydes provides a style that is always going to be difficult to beat in the heavyweight division. Now, the thing is with Curtis Blaydes, though, he has been knocked out on numerous occasions. Now, one of the things that he had going his way early in his UFC career is he was getting hit hard by some hard hitters with knees, with big punches, and he was getting rocked and wobbled, but being able to recover and having that wrestling in his back pocket. But I do feel that early in that career, when he was getting hit with those big shots, it was chipping away a little bit at his durability. Now, I don't think that he's got durability issues. I just think that he's not that solid metal chin guy that he was early in his UFC career. And the thing is with Pavlovich, I think even outside of Ngannou, Pavlovich is probably the hardest hitter in the UFC, even harder than Derek Lewis. Like, it doesn't look like it because Pavlovich doesn't throw with that devastating bomb like what Derek Lewis would throw with, for example. But Pavlovich, man, when he connects, he does put the lights out, and he doesn't have to overexert on a punch. He doesn't have to wind up on the punch to knock his opponent out. He's got that real short punch power, and in the heavyweight division, that is dangerous. So that is a real concern. I mean, it's always a concern in the heavyweight division. 4-ounce gloves, the biggest guys in the sport, you know, throwing down. But with Pavlovich, that danger of that knockout power is exaggerated by a big way just because of how powerful he is. And this leads me on to the betting advice that I was going to provide that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. if you are betting Sergei Pavlovich in this fight, you just bet him by knockout, because this is a 5-round fight. Pavlovich ain't winning no 5-round decision against Curtis Blaydes. If he does, I'll be super shocked. Obviously, it'll be egg on your face moment, but I'll definitely be very shocked if Pavlovich comes out there and beats Curtis Blaydes over 5 rounds. And the reason I'm saying that is not because I don't think Pavlovich can keep up with Blaydes for 5 rounds or anything like that. The main reason is, if Pavlovich is winning a decision against Curtis Blaydes, it means that the fight is standing. It means that Pavlovich is landing good volume, and that will take Pavlovich to winning that decision. But where I don't think that Pavlovich wins that decision is if that scenario is playing out and Pavlovich is landing enough volume. I just don't think that Curtis Blaydes will stay conscious for 5 rounds while Pavlovich is landing volume on him. At some point, a punch is going to hurt him, knock him out, rock him, and Pavlovich would finish him. I just don't think that Pavlovich... Again, I'm not saying it's a volume issue, I'm just saying it's the fact that if Pavlovich is landing volume, it's likely that he doesn't land all that volume without knocking a fighter out because of the power that he's got. So if you are betting Pavlovich, I would just bet him by knockout, because that's the path to victory. And from a decision perspective, I just don't think that he's going to be able to do enough to win a decision without knocking Curtis Blaydes out. But ultimately, I think Curtis Blaydes is in a stylistically favourable matchup here. If he avoids the knockout shot, if he goes straight in for the takedowns, I think he's got takedowns at will against Pavlovich. I think the top control time will be able to smother Pavlovich. We've seen Pavlovich on his back against Overeem, with Overeem landing shots and Pavlovich not being able to stand back up to his feet. Curtis Blaydes is levels above what Overeem was at in regards to that wrestling and topside game and the ground and pound and the grappling therefore after. So yeah, the big path to victory here in this entire fight is Curtis Blaydes, his wrestling and his top control time, especially over 5 rounds as well. We have seen Blaydes do it for 5 rounds. He was tired against Volkov when he did it for 5 rounds there, but that's because Volkov's get-up game was on point and he kept making Blaydes work. I'm not sure Pavlovich is going to be able to consistently stand back up to his feet, but the thing is, even looking outside the wrestling and grappling, Curtis Blaydes isn't actually a bad striker. You look at that Tom Aspinall fight, I know the fight ended in a weird way. I know it ended very early in the fight, so we didn't really get to see it play out, but, you know, the talk was of Tom Aspinall being light years ahead of Curtis Blaydes in regards to the technical striking, but Curtis Blaydes in those early moments, and I know it's a small sample size because the fight ended early, but Curtis Blaydes looked good striking against Tom Aspinall. It didn't look like he was outmatched at all. He was throwing punches and rolling with the punches and exchanging with Tom Aspinall. And Curtis Blaydes also did a good job against Derek Lewis striking as well, until he went in for the takedown and got knocked out. So Curtis Blaydes' striking is low-key pretty good. His wrestling's even better. His topside grappling can be very good as well. And against somebody like Pavlovich, like I've already said, Pavlovich, you've got to be careful, and you run the risk of getting knocked out by Pavlovich when you step inside the cage with him, just because he does have that real, legit, devastating KO power. But stylistically, I think this is a fight for Curtis Blaydes to, you know, make his reads early on with his striking, use the striking to then level change and get into the takedowns and get his wrestling going relatively safely. And like I say, I think that Curtis Blaydes, that style is going to be enough for him to beat Pavlovich in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Curtis Blaydes to win this fight. And in the next fight, the co-main event, I've got a funny feeling this is going to be the fight that everybody is looking forward to this week. It's an absolute banger. We've got Song Yadong versus Ricky Simone. Now, the first thing that I do want to mention really quickly is I am quite surprised with the betting line in this fight. I did think that, you know, I thought the lines were going to be close. I thought it was going to be around a pick'em, but I wouldn't have been surprised to see Song Yadong as a very slight favourite in this spot. And the reason being is because I think that Song Yadong is just a really popular fighter to back, and he has been by the public for a long time now. People love to back Song Yadong. He's exciting, he's fast, he's powerful, he's a good all-round type of fighter, and it's the usual case that Song Yadong is a popular bet. And because he's sitting at plus money right now, at the time of recording this, I did think that people would absolutely smash that plus money and bring it back down. And again, maybe there's some steam chasers out there which would then bet Song into a very slight favourite. So I am surprised to see Song Yadong settling at around plus money in this spot. However, you do have to ask yourself, well, why is he settling in that spot where he's normally a very popular fighter to back, especially as a plus money underdog? And the reason's quite simple. You know, historically speaking, Song Yadong has struggled in these types of fights against fighters like Ricky Simone that are going to want to stick to him like glue, are going to want to take him down, be relentless with the wrestling. And the thing is with Song Yadong, one thing that he's got going for him is he does have a decent get-up game, and his takedown defense isn't that bad either. But those seem to be the initial moments. The fighters that can get at Song Yadong are the fighters that persist with the takedowns, that keep coming, that don't get discouraged when they either A, take Song down, or B, take him down and then Song stands back up. Those fighters that will keep going and keep getting at him will eventually get at him. And that's where Song can start derailing in a fight, because he can get taken down. And when he is taken down, after a couple of times of getting back up, he can sort of start to mentally give up a little bit in regards to thinking, you know, shit, I've just been taken down for the third or fourth time. I keep getting back up, I keep getting taken back down. And then you can start to see the get up game really starting to leave Song Yadong, and then the top control time starts to rack up a little bit more and a little bit more. And I feel that that type of fighter is always going to be a stylistic nightmare for somebody like Song Yadong. And when I mention historically speaking, Cody Stamann took Song Yadong down 5 times. Marlon Chito Vera took Song down twice. Kyler Phillips took Song down 3 times. Casey Kenny took Song down. Corey Sandhagen last time out took Song down. And look, Corey Sandhagen isn't known for his wrestling, although he has been putting it into his game a little bit more in his last couple of fights. But Corey Sandhagen just hung on to Song as well. So even in the moments Sandhagen wasn't taking him down, he was just sticking to him against the cage, getting the body lock, just making it difficult for Song to get out into open space and fight his fight, because that's where Song Yadong wants to be. He wants to be dictating the pace. He wants to be dictating the range. And when Song does have the benefit inside the cage of having those advantages of dictating the pace and the range, he's a really dangerous fighter, and that's where he thrives. But the thing is, in this fight with Ricky Simone, like, Ricky Simone's not going to stop coming forward. His striking's actually getting pretty decent himself. He beat and took out Jack Shaw last time out. Jack Shaw, the undefeated fighter. A lot of people thought Shaw would continue to be undefeated for a number of years, but it was Simone that beat him and finished him as well, and looked great in doing so. It wasn't like a comeback victory or anything like that. So Ricky Simone has got some momentum on his side now. He's starting to put it together a little bit better. I think he can hang with Song Yadong a little bit. And then once the wrestling and the grappling starts going, I think Song's going to stand back up for the first 3, 4, 5 takedowns. But the thing is, what happens when the takedowns become 6, 7 and 8? I think that's where Ricky Simone's going to eventually get at someone like Song Yadong. And the thing is with Ricky Simone, to beat a fighter like Ricky Simone, you've got to match his pace, his pressure, and his relentless style inside the cage before you can even start to open up and fight your own game. And that's a type of fighter that's difficult to beat. Very much like a Curtis Blaydes at the top of the card, very much like a Merab Dvalishvili. So yeah, I think in this fight, Song Yadong should have some moments early on. I think defensively, from a wrestling and grappling perspective, he's going to be okay early on. But I think the longer the fight goes on, the more Ricky Simone's just going to wear on Song and just become stronger throughout the fight. And it's actually a little bit strange as well, because Song Yadong has reached the higher levels than Ricky Simone. I mean, that fight out with Corey Sandhagen last time for Song Yadong, if Song Yadong had won that fight, people would have been talking about a title shot for Song, but it wasn't his night. And I still actually genuinely think his ceiling might still be higher than Ricky Simone's, but styles make fights. Like I mentioned with the fight previously, Sergei Pavlovich and Blaydes, you know, even though one fighter might have the higher ceiling, styles always make fights. So in this fight, I'm picking Ricky Simone to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Brad Tavares versus Bruno Silva. Now, both fighters coming off a loss. Bruno Silva's loss, though, like, that was strange. And I say this all the time. I genuinely believe it for this particular fight. But any athlete, sportsman, sportswoman in any sport on the planet, all elite athletes have an off night, an off day, an off game, an off match, an off fight, whatever, you know, terminology is associated with the sport of that elite athlete. All athletes have off performances, and I genuinely believe Bruno Silva's last time out against Gerald Meerschaert was an off performance, and that's taking nothing away from Gerald Meerschaert. I don't want to do that, but look at what happened in the Bruno Silva fight before the Meerschaert fight. He fought Alex Pereira, who then became went on to become the middleweight champion. Obviously now he's lost his middleweight championship a couple of weeks ago, but Bruno Silva went toe-to-toe with Alex Pereira on the feet. He took his best shot. Sure, he was wobbled a couple of times, but look, Pereira's got insane power. We know that. We know he's a world-class kickboxer. And Bruno Silva, I'm not saying the fight was close, but it was super competitive. So the fact that Bruno Silva went with Alex Pereira like that, and then in the next fight, he just struggled to get anything going against Meerschaert. And he was doing some okay things inside the cage, like he was striking okay, but he wasn't looking anywhere close to how he looked last time out against Pereira. If in that fight with Silva and Pereira, if that was Meerschaert instead of Pereira on that night, it would have ended probably early in the first round. But the fact that, like I say, Bruno Silva went to war with Pereira and then against Meerschaert, it wasn't quite at it. I don't know whether it was just an off performance. I don't know whether there was an injury, but I genuinely think that it was a bit of an anomaly fight. And until I see this fight, if Tavares goes into this fight and absolutely runs through Bruno Silva, then maybe we're thinking, okay, well, the Alex Pereira fight was the anomaly fight. But I think that Bruno Silva's a skilled fighter. He's a dangerous striker, Muay Thai base. He's coached by Master Andre Dida over at Evolucao Muay Thai. He's got submission wrestling experience. He's a BJJ black belt. He's a really well put together fighter. Now, in regards to Brad Tavares is a solid fighter as well. He's a staple of the UFC. He's been around for years, multiple contracts. He's fought some of the best fighters that the UFC have produced inside the promotion. So you don't fight and continue to fight at this level for this long if you're not a good fighter, if you're not a well-rounded fighter. But I kind of think, although Brad Tavares is probably the type of fighter that's going to be solid up until he does retire, like I don't think you're going to see a massive cliff dive from Tavares in regards to his performances. I do think that he's being able to be got at a little bit more now than what he would have been, 5 or 6 years ago. I think that Brad Tavares is still a solid striker. I think he's still a solid wrestler. I think he's still a solid grappler. But like I said, he can be got at. And it's weird, actually. I kind of think it's going to be the more awkward type of fighters that end up having this kind of success against him. And I hear this with, like, poker. I've heard people say before with poker that, if they're a really good poker player, that they hate playing poker against somebody that's not as experienced or as good as playing poker because they struggle to make the reads. And it's kind of similar in regards to well put together fighters and awkward fighters. Well put together fighters are expecting, or are used to dealing with or having knowledge dealing with fighters that are throwing good technique and are setting things up and are putting nice combinations together. But then when they fight these strikers that are putting bursts of aggression together and crazy strikes and coming in from different angles, like, it kind of throws them off a little bit. And we saw that last time out with Tavares and Duplessis. Duplessis was just charging forward with his chin up in the air, winging big punches out at Tavares, just trying to get him from one side of the cage to the other, moving backwards. And Tavares really struggled to deal with it. He took round 1 against Duplessis, but then completely fell apart rounds 2 and 3. And Bruno Silva's style striking isn't too dissimilar from that. Now, Bruno Silva is technical. He's got a good technical game. But when he comes forward, he does burst forwards with that type of aggression that we saw from Duplessis. So, listen, I think it's going to be a good fight. I think it's actually a well-matched fight. I do think that Bruno Silva could have potentially just had an off night against Gerald Meerschaert last time out, but we'll find that out in this fight. If Tavares does run through him, like I say, maybe the Alex Pereira fight was the anomaly fight. But I do think that Bruno Silva is still a solid fighter, well put together fighter. He's dangerous, he's got power, he's got good striking, he's got good wrestling, although I don't think the wrestling's going to work in this fight against Tavares. I think Bruno Silva is going to have to try and keep the fight standing. Brad Tavares has just got some godlike takedown defense, a bit like how Sam Alvey was. It was always difficult to take Sam Alvey down, and it's the same with Tavares. So I think it's a fight that, like I say, it's going to be good. It's going to be close. It's actually well matched, but I am going to side with Bruno Silva just based on the fact that I do think he had an off night against Meerschaert. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bruno Silva to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bobby Green versus Jared Gordon. Jared Gordon obviously coming off that robbery against Paddy Pimblett. And, well, I say robbery, tongue-in-cheek, to be honest. It was a fight Jared Gordon should have won. I think 99% of MMA fans agree with that. But yeah, look, in that fight, Gordon I thought was actually going to be a lot better than what he was. I thought that, yeah, sure, he won, but I genuinely thought that he was going to be able to 30-27 Paddy Pimblett relatively comfortably, and it didn't quite play out like that. He got hit a little bit more than what you'd want him to get hit, even though Paddy Pimblett, again, doesn't have the tightest striking, and that's not a negative because Paddy Pimblett's striking works for him. He's explosive and wild, but it's not like a really tight, well put together striking attack. And Jared Gordon was able to be got at. He was hit a little bit too much than what you'd want to see. And the thing is, coming in against Bobby Green in this fight, we know Bobby Green's going to have pressure. We know Bobby Green's going to have good movement. We know Bobby Green's going to put volume together, and he's got that awkward type of striking as well, where it's a little bit hands down and he's talking to his opponent. I think from a wrestling perspective, Bobby Green, again, like I just mentioned with Tavares in the last fight, I think Bobby Green's got insane takedown defense. I think it's very, very difficult to take him down. I'm not sure Gordon's wrestling's good enough to get Bobby Green down, at least not get him down consistently. And I think for Gordon to make this fight his on the mat, I think he's not only got to get him down consistent, well, he's got to get him down consistently because I think Bobby Green will keep standing back up. Bobby Green's got a good get-up game, good defensive jiu-jitsu. So if Gordon takes Bobby Green down, which again, I'm not overly convinced he's going to be able to, although you can never say never, I don't think he's going to be able to keep him down. So I do think the fight is going to play out on the feet for the majority of the time. And I think Bobby Green, again, his volume, his speed, his awkward style of striking, I think Gordon's going to be in this fight. 100% he's going to be in this fight. He's going to make it competitive. I just don't see him having enough success in this fight to be able to take the fight from Bobby Green. I don't think he's going to knock Bobby Green out. So if Gordon wins, it is more likely to be on the scorecards. And I just really don't see it. I think Bobby Green could potentially score takedowns himself. So yeah, I think it's going to be competitive. I think Gordon will have his moments, but I think Bobby Green over 3 rounds is just going to be able to do enough against somebody like Gordon. I don't think there's massive levels in this, but I think because Bobby Green has fought the better level of competition, he is more experienced. And again, from a stylistic perspective, I just think he's going to do more that favour him on the judges' scorecards. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bobby Green to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Yasmin Lucindo versus Brogan Walker. Yasmin Lucindo coming off that absolutely phenomenal fight with Yasmin Haruge, both on their UFC debuts. I was a little bit unsure of exactly what type of pace and tempo that fight would play out at, but man, it was fun. And Lucindo, I actually thought was going to come in with the wrestling and grappling game plan as well, as that's where she looked to be strongest outside of the UFC. But man, her striking held up with Yasmin Haruge. Both fighters just were lighting each other up. It was exciting, a ton of volume. Haruge ended up coming out on top though, as like I say, I did think that Lucindo's specific style was more with the wrestling and, well, more with the grappling base, and she would be the one looking for the takedowns. Haruge, in my opinion, had the striking advantage, and it showed in the end, but man, like Lucindo's leveled up her striking and become a really good all-round fighter. Brogan Walker, I think, is in for a difficult fight here. I think with Walker, she's got this safe style where she's got good striking, Muay Thai type of striker, but then she has got a decent, well-rounded game. She can wrestle, she can grapple. So it's not as if Brogan Walker's a one-trick pony. She is well-rounded, she can fight everywhere. But I think with Yasmin Lucindo, from what we saw last time out with Haruge, I think Lucindo's going to have the volume advantage, a big speed advantage, a good movement advantage, and I think her striking overall will, because of those advantages and traits that I've just listed, I think her striking's going to look better than Walker's. But then if Lucindo does want to close the distance, get a hold of Walker and get her down to the mat, if she can get Walker down, I think she's going to have a big grappling advantage over Walker as well. So I'm just seeing a multiple path to victory here for a fighter who I think is better in more areas than her opponent, and that fighter is Lucindo. So for those reasons, I'm picking Yasmin Lucindo to win this fight. And next up, this one for me is going to be low-key fun. We've got Jeremiah Wells versus Matt Semelsberger. Now, Jeremiah Wells coming off absolutely running through Blood Diamond, knocking Court McGee out in devastating fashion early in their fights. And that Court McGee one was actually a real interesting one. I was on Jeremiah Wells. I think I bet him at like plus 105 or something, some low plus money. A lot of people were on Court McGee, thought the veteran job was going to pull out, but nah, for me, Jeremiah Wells is a solid, well put together fighter. Now, what's going to be interesting in this fight is I don't think he's going to be able to run through Matt Semelsberger like he ran through Court McGee and like he ran through Blood Diamond. Like Matt Semelsberger is going to be a taller fighter, a bigger fighter, but he's also durable, and he's one of those junkyard dog type of fighters where he's always going to make things dirty, ugly, scrappy, and when he's hurt, he probably does some of his best work when he's hurt. So I think that if Wells comes into this fight thinking he's just going to take Semelsberger out like he has done in his last two fights against his last two previous opponents, I think Jeremiah Wells could potentially be making a big mistake, and it might be one of those fights where he thinks, or he's got him hurt and thinks he's going to get him out just because that's happened in his last two fights, and then tire himself out, and then somebody who is scrappy, dirty, ugly like Semelsberger in regards to his style and how he likes to fight. I think that type of fighter could then start pushing the pace and taking over the fight. But if Wells comes into this fight level-headed, not assuming he's going to get a knockout, and just starts putting everything together, I think we're going to see a little bit of levels here, because I do think Jeremiah Wells is a very good fighter. His striking's obviously explosive and he's got power, which we've already seen, but his wrestling and his grappling's good as well. Like he's a very, very good grappler, and if he gets on top of Semelsberger, I do think he's going to be able to do good work. So I think from a style perspective, I think it's going to be interesting because you've got explosivity against somebody that can grind and make fights dirty and ugly, like I've already mentioned. But from a skill set perspective, I think Jeremiah Wells is just a better fighter here. And sure, Matt Semelsberger's going to have his moments. Matt Semelsberger's a well-rounded fighter himself. He's got some good wins. He's an exciting fighter, one that I think is slowly starting to make his name for himself. Is he a fighter that's going to be at the top of the division later in his career? Likely not, but man, he's the type of fighter, like a Brian Barberena type of fighter, a fighter that's just going to, he'll fight for your money. If you bet on him, he'll just make things scrappy and he'll be in fights. And I think he's that type of fighter. It's just, for me, Jeremiah Wells does have the power and explosivity on the feet, but he's also got a very, very good grappling game in his back pocket as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jeremiah Wells to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ricky Glenn versus Christos Giagos. Now, Christos Giagos is interesting because he's the type of fighter legitimately that will win the fights he absolutely should win, but lose the fights he absolutely should lose. And it's very rare that Giagos is matched quite well, if that makes sense. Like, I feel that it's either always one way or the other. He's either matched where you know that he's going to lose, or matched where you know he's going to win. And in this fight, I actually think this is a well-matched fight. So it's going to be interesting to see how this fight goes when it's back and forth. And someone like Ricky Glenn is a good fighter as well. He's going to be a good opponent for Giagos. Ricky Glenn's a good striker. He's a good wrestler. He's got good grappling. And Christos Giagos, you can say the same. He's got decent striking. He's got decent wrestling, and he's got decent grappling. So I do feel like it's a well-matched fight. Where I'm struggling to trust Giagos in this fight is within the cardio. So we have seen, even in some of the fights that Giagos has won, he tires out very quickly. It does look like the weight cut is a little bit too much. He always speaks about in interviews how he's improved his conditioning and his cardio, but then he does again tire out quickly later in the fight. And that's where I think that Ricky Glenn's got an advantage here, because Ricky Glenn is a fighter that does have a bit of an engine on him. He can keep going, and it's very rare that Glenn will tire out to the point where he's not functioning to his full ability at that certain stage in the fight, whereas Giagos can tire out to the point of, he's now in round 3 not doing anything, and he's absorbing so much pressure, and he's on the back foot, and he's, vulnerable to be getting hit, and for his opponents to start pouring that pressure on and start really working, the final moments of the fight. And Ricky Glenn's that type of fighter that will capitalise on anybody that's tiring and, slowing down later in the fight. So I think Christos Giagos is going to start the fight better, because the reason Giagos tires out is because he starts fights fast, and he normally has a really, exciting, good round 1 and first 7.5 minutes of the fight maybe. So I think Giagos is going to start slightly better. I think that Glenn is probably going to feel a little bit of the strength and power of Giagos, because I do think he's going to be bigger and stronger than Ricky Glenn. But I think the longer the fight goes on, the more Glenn's just going to take over. And I don't think Giagos gets Glenn out of there, really. So I do think Giagos is going to have to potentially fight later into this fight. And I think that even when Giagos has a good start, I think Ricky Glenn's going to start coming back into this fight sort of midway in round 2 and really pour it on round 3. Maybe we even see a round 3 finish from Ricky Glenn. But I think that, I think the cardio is going to play a big part in this fight, in a fight that stylistically and from a skill set perspective is actually quite close, competitive and well matched. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ricky Glenn to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an interesting fight. I would normally call it an upcomer prospect, but Montel Jackson's been around for quite a while now. But we've got Rani Yahya versus Montel Jackson. Now, I think it's going to be a tough fight for Yahya. You can never really count him out, though. Like, Yahya does have that legit BJJ. He has that BJJ old man strength as well, where he can look good against his opponents. And if you do make one mistake on the mat with Yahya, he's wrapping up a leg, or, he's hitting a sweep or reversal and getting on top of you and then looking to start. He's hitting his own submissions, loves the arm triangle, getting into mount. So Montel Jackson has absolutely got to mind his P's and Q's here. But Montel Jackson is also the younger fighter, the fresher fighter. He's going to have a 4-inch height advantage. I think it's a 7.5 reach advantage that he's going to have over Rani Yahya as well. Not to mention a speed advantage, a striking advantage, a movement advantage. So there's just so many advantages here for Montel Jackson that it is literally just going to be the fight hitting the mat and Montel Jackson making a mistake that Yahya capitalizes on and gets on top of him. I don't think that Yahya can consistently take Montel Jackson down over 3 rounds and hold him down. I do think that it's going to be the fight hitting the mat for whatever reason. Maybe Montel Jackson drops Yahya, but doesn't drop him too hard, gets on top, and Yahya can sweep and reverse from that position. It's a tough fight for Yahya, but one that he might have a Hail Mary path to victory here in regards to a submission. Like I say, even if Montel Jackson just, is on top and makes a mistake in regards to some transitioning, and Yahya just blocks that transition and starts wrapping up a leg and gets a heel hook or a knee bar, I don't know. I think that it's a Hail Mary opportunity for Yahya, but a legitimate one at that. It's almost like the heavyweight having that puncher's chance, being a 265-pound fighter. Yahya has that Hail Mary puncher's chance just in a submission format. But outside of that, look, it's hard to look past Montel Jackson, who's got all the advantages that I've mentioned above. I think it's going to be a long night for Yahya, a tough night, and one that I just don't think that he does find that submissioner's chance, if you like. Don't know about that phrase, but you know what I mean. Listen, I'm picking Montel Jackson to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a really close fight and one that's really tough to call. We've got Karol Rosa versus Norma Dumont. And it's a close fight because both women have got good skill sets. They've got good abilities. They can both strike. They can both wrestle. They can both grapple. Offensively, they're both decent. Defensively, they're both decent. And it's a very, very well-matched fight to the point of, look, you even look at the betting line. Some bookies have got this as a pick'em. Some have got Rosa still as the slight favourite. Some have got Dumont now as the slight favourite. So it's all over the place in regards to the bookies, and you can completely understand why. Now, in regards to, like I said, the stylistic matchup here, they're both solid everywhere. So if this fight plays out as a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think that it's likely to go to a split decision. I think both fighters will have success. I think both fighters will have the moment, but ultimately it'll be super close and super competitive. I think if this fight is a grappling match, I think that Karol Rosa might have the edge as long as she's on top. But if it's Dumont that's on top of Rosa, I think then that fight then becomes very close from the grappling perspective. When you're looking at the wrestling, I think Dumont might have the slightly better takedowns, the slightly better wrestling. Mainly because I do think she's going to be more physical. I think she's going to be the slightly stronger fighter inside the cage, therefore slightly stronger in the clinch positions, and maybe the more likely fighter to dominate those clinch positions, which again starts to give her a little bit of an advantage. But ultimately, the fight is going to be back and forth. Both women are going to have the moments. If this goes to a split decision, I ain't going to be surprised at all. If this is one of those fights where people are complaining about it going either way, I'm not going to be surprised at all, just because it could be one of these fights that's interpreted many different ways. When it comes from a picking perspective, for me, it's tough. Like I say, I kind of think that maybe the biggest path to victory is maybe with Karol Rosa with the top side grappling, because if she does get on top, I think that's where she does her best work as a fighter. But I'm just not sure how much or how many opportunities she's going to have of A, taking Dumont down, B, actually getting Dumont down. So Dumont might also be able to get back up to her feet. I think the physicality of this fight and the strength of Dumont, weirdly, is edging me to pick her, and that's not normally the case. You don't normally base a pick just on physicality, but the fight's that close from a skill set perspective, in my opinion, that you have to start looking at other variables inside the fight. And, for me, I think Dumont might be the more aggressive fighter, being a little bit more physical. So for those reasons, I am siding with Norma Dumont to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mohammed Usman versus Junior Tafa. Mohammed Usman, the brother of Kamaru Usman, and Junior Tafa, the brother of Justin Tafa. So now two brothers in the UFC, and I think the talking point of this fight particularly is going to be the betting line and the movement that we saw yesterday. And yesterday is Sunday. I'm recording this on Monday morning in the UK. So Usman was around plus 180, plus 185, and then a couple of hours later, it absolutely sunk into a minus 110 pick'em. So money came in on Usman, big money came in, fast money came in, and now this fight is a pick'em. And to be honest with you, you never really see lines move that fast. I can't think of the last time a line jumped that quick. So, look, I'm not saying it's suspicious or anything like that. I know it's not suspicious. I know that money just came in on Usman, but it's just very rare to see a fighter who's near 2-1 drop that fast and that quickly down to a pick'em. And in some spots, Usman's a favourite now as well. So, yeah, that's the talking point. The betting line, it all sunk in. And look, I understand where that line movement came from, Personally, I was going to bet Mohammed Usman at around plus 180. I missed the line due to the fact of how fast it jumped, but at minus 110 or, even at plus 130, plus 140, I was not interested in that. I wanted that plus 180. I probably would have took plus 175, but, where it is now is, I'm absolutely not interested at all. So I kind of given my pick away for this fight as well. Look, with Junior Tafa, I think he's an undersized heavyweight. I think he's going to be much more suited to light heavyweight, and it wouldn't surprise me if he did drop to light heavyweight at some point, unless he does fill out and put some weight on. He's definitely on the smaller scale of a heavyweight. Now, what's going to come with that is speed and movement, and those are the advantages he's going to have against Usman. And Tafa also does pack that Tafa power as well. Let's not forget his brother's got raw power. Junior Tafa doesn't have as much power, but that's just because he's not as big, in my opinion. But he still has knockout power, legitimate knockout power. So he's got speed, he's got movement, and I actually think he's got the knockout power in this fight. Even though Usman hits hard, look what he did to Pauga. He hit Pauga with like a check left hook. It was a lead hand, and he knocked Pauga out cold with that. And it was no wind up on it or anything like that. So look, Usman's got power as well, but I think the speed, the movement, and the power advantages go for Tafa. But where I like Usman is he does also have that power, so he can knock Tafa out as well. But Usman his nickname is very fitting, the motor. He just keeps going. He keeps coming forward. He's durable. He can take damage, and he can keep just coming forwards and working his game and slowly chipping away at his opponents. I really like how Mohammed Usman fights. His nickname of the motor is just so fitting, just because the way he just keeps motoring on throughout the rounds. He keeps landing volume, but then when it's time to land big, he'll land big. He does have wrestling in his back pocket. He does have some grappling as well. We don't see him use it often, but against Tafa's still green and young in his MMA career. We've seen him getting taken down. We've seen him have moments on his back. So again, I think that could be a path to victory for Usman, should he decide to actually use his wrestling in this fight. If this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, then it's going to look every bit of a pick'em. And I actually think Tafa might hold advantages in that type of fight, because at some point that speed and movement is going to allow a hard punch to land or a hard kick to land. But if this fight is a mixed martial arts fight, and it's mixed up, that's going to be from Usman's side, and that's then going to make Usman look like he should be the slight favourite in this fight. It is going to be a close fight. I do think Usman has multiple paths to victory. I do think, although he's running risks, having a 15-minute kickboxing fight with Tafa inside the cage, I do think that Usman could win that type of fight as well. So, look, for all those reasons, definitely dangerous for Usman, but I am picking Mohammed Usman to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an interesting fight, and it's interesting because the UFC have actually matched two really young up-and-comers together. They clearly just want to find out, and I'm all for these types of fights. Sometimes we don't like it because, you know, it's two prospects that we really like to watch, and we want to cash them against fighters that they should be beating before they meet each other. But yeah, look, I don't mind prospect versus prospect. I don't mind finding out one fighter gets a huge boost, the other fighter resets and has to work through those fights that we wanted them to fight anyway. So yeah, here we've got Francis Marshall versus William Gomis, and yeah, it's a great fight. William Gomis, he's got the experience on his side, but both fighters are really well-rounded. They've got good striking, they've got good wrestling, they've got decent grappling. I think Francis Marshall's going to be better from the wrestling and grappling perspective. I think Gomis is going to be slightly better from the striking perspective. But the thing is, Gomis, because he's a good striker, he has developed his takedown defense, probably on the job. You know, he does a decent job of getting back up to his feet, but he can be got at in those wrestling and grappling departments, and that is the worry here for Marshall. Well, when he's fighting Marshall in this fight, I do think that Marshall is going to be able to get takedowns. I do think Marshall's going to have top control time, and when the fight's on the feet, I do give the slight advantage to William Gomis, but I don't think Marshall's going to be outmatched massively on the feet. So now you've got the advantage slightly with Gomis on the feet, but I think Marshall's got a much bigger advantage in the wrestling and grappling department over Gomis. And that's where, although I think it's going to be a close and competitive fight, I am leaning towards Francis Marshall. But then the experience of Gomis could play a part. Is Francis Marshall going to look green? I'm not too sure. Look, I think Marshall is going to do a decent job in this fight. I think that he can be competitive on the feet, but then he's got the advantages in the wrestling and grappling, and ultimately I think that's going to be the difference maker. For this fight, I'm picking Francis Marshall to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got Priscila Cachoeira versus Karine Silva. Now, fair play to Cachoeira. I think a lot of people writ her off a long time ago, but she's coming into this fight off back-to-back wins, and she's looking like she's putting something together, a little bit of form, and she's got some finishes as well, some knockouts. The Zombie Girl, also an absolute fitting nickname, like we mentioned with Usman earlier on. Cachoeira will come forward, she'll take 3 or 4 punches if it means just being able to advance and land a combination back on her opponent. But I do think that she's got a tough fight ahead of her with Karine Silva. Now, Karine Silva, her grappling and submission game looks to be very, very good, but her striking game can complement that now as well. I think she's turning a little bit into the full package in regards to being very well-rounded. Not quite sure what the ceiling is yet with Karine Silva, but, you know, we're going to find out in the next couple of fights. This fight, I think Silva's going to have to deal with pressure. I think she's going to have to deal with Cachoeira coming forward, looking to try and take her out. But I think Silva will deal with those things. I think Cachoeira, although she is good, she's fun, she's exciting, I do think the better skilled and quality fighter in more areas in this fight is going to show through, and I think that fighter that is more skilled is Karine Silva. I think if Karine Silva does keep it on the feet, it's going to be a little closer than what she'd probably like. I still think she can win a 15-minute kickboxing fight against Cachoeira though, but when you really start to mix in the ground game, mixing the wrestling, getting on the mat, putting your ground game in, submission game for Silva, I think that she's going to be able to get at Cachoeira in a big way once the fight hits the mat, and I'm assuming the fight will hit the mat in this fight with Karine Silva in the dominant position. So if Cachoeira does survive those dominant positions and Karine Silva just rides out minutes of the rounds, then that could be a possible way of Silva winning a decision across the 3 rounds. But I do think Silva's going to be ultra dangerous with the submission game. She's got a big finishing upside in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Karine Silva to win this fight. And finally, we get to the final fight, and I'm not sure why this fight is the first fight of the night. It's actually a really good one. We've got Danaa versus Brady Hiestand. Now, this is probably the most obvious stylistic clash type of fight that you could ever possibly find. You've got Danaa, who's an absolute out-and-out striker, doesn't really want too much to do with the wrestling and grappling in fights. And then you've got Brady Hiestand, who is absolutely a wrestler and grappler, will strike in fights, but will also just turn relentless because that's where he wants to fight. So you've got two obvious paths to victory. You've got two obvious game plans. There's no way both of these fighters come into this fight thinking that, or not knowing what their opponent wants to do. Danaa knows that Hiestand's going to try and take him down. Hiestand knows that Danaa is going to do everything humanly possible to keep this fight on the feet. So it's going to be really interesting to see which fighter's game plan actually takes lead in this fight. Now, with Brady Hiestand, the one thing that you've got to remember is the kid's still 23. Like, he's still developing. He's got good people around him as well. Michael Chiesa is a coach and a training partner. He's also worked with Merab Diwalishvili and Aljamain Steele in this camp as well. But the key training partner for me for Hiestand is Chiesa, because Michael Chiesa is a fighter that's got good wrestling and good grappling, and over the years has developed and refined his striking to be able to, keep up and be competitive at the top end of the division. And I kind of feel like that's the journey Brady Hiestand's going on. So he's got a perfect partner like Chiesa, who's been through it all and is that finished product like Hiestand will want to be. So I like what Hiestand's doing. His wrestling's good as well. He is relentless. He'll shoot out in the open. He'll shoot for a double leg. If he doesn't get the double leg, he can chain to a single leg. Then he can chain to body locks, drag downs. And when the fight hits the mat, he's very assured with his grappling. He doesn't make too many mistakes. Transitioning's really good as well. He'll get in dominant positions. He'll look for submissions. Hiestand's a really good grappler. But then looking at his striking, his striking's just not there yet. It is still going to be developing, so I expect to see Brady Hiestand striking look better each time we see him. But this is a fighter that doesn't shy away from the striking because he knows that all fights start standing and the striking has to lead to the takedowns. And his striking is absolutely a means to the takedowns at the minute. But with Hiestand, man, he can get hurt and dropped. Now, the counter to that is he gets hurt and dropped and scores a takedown straight away afterwards and recovers really quickly. But it's also a round loser. When you're getting dropped, you're losing a round. When you're getting hurt badly, you're losing a round. And that's where the worry comes in for Hiestand. And then enter Danaa. Now, Danaa is a very well polished and well put together striker. Really fluid. Will put combinations together. Will switch stances. Will work to the body, to the legs and the head of his opponent. Will also fire kicks within his combinations, within his boxing as well. So Danaa is a very good striker. He's also got low-key power as well. So it's going to be one of those fights where Hiestand could come into range to try and take Danaa down, and Danaa just lands something up the middle or straight down the middle and, knocks Hiestand down or knocks him out. Both of those are realistic possibilities from Danaa's perspective. And also the other thing going for Danaa in this fight is he fights well moving backwards. So normally you can say, look, when the wrestler's coming forwards and you take away that forward pressure and you stop the opponent dictating the range and the pace of the fight, that's where the wrestler can get at the striker. But when the striker's good fighting backwards, it makes it even more difficult. However, where I think that Hiestand could shut Danaa down is still within the takedown attempts, being relentless, because if Danaa is taken down and he's kept down for a certain amount of time, when he gets back up to his feet, he's going to be a little bit hesitant striking in case he overextends, and Hiestand just takes him down again. He's also going to be more focused on the movement, exiting and angling back out into space than he is landing strikes on the back foot. So I do think that the relentless pressure of Hiestand, the relentless nature of him, is going to be able to maybe shut Danaa down a little bit. The early moments of this fight is going to be dangerous, but I think if Brady can make the right reads and if his striking has developed, which I anticipate it has, then he should be able to put some good work together throughout the fight. And also this could be a little bit of a shock to the system as well, because Danaa hasn't fought this type of fighter since his UFC debut, and even then it wasn't really as relentless as what Hiestand's going to be delivering inside the cage. Danaa's been matched relatively well in regards to strikers and fighters that aren't predominantly wrestlers and grapplers, but in this fight, it's definitely going to be a shock to the system, having a fighter that's wanting to stick to you like glue. I think it's going to be close and competitive. I do think that Danaa is going to have his moments in this fight, but the style of Hiestand is going to be difficult for Danaa throughout the fight to deal with and get a win against. So for those reasons, I'm picking Brady Hiestand to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. So if you enjoyed it, as always, please like the video on YouTube if that's where you're watching or listening, tuning in. If you are on YouTube, please drop us a subscription as well. I'll get my teeth in. Yeah, drop me a subscription as well. It really helps the channel and helps us grow further. So again, I appreciate that, and all the comments as well. I'll always try and get back to the comments as best that I can. So tell me who you're betting on, tell me who you're picking, tell me what your predictions are. If we disagree, tell me why we disagree. And if you are betting on Saturday night, bet responsibly, gamble responsibly, but cash, beat the bookies. I'm Newsome. I'll see you again next week.